We have an intense and interactive program lined up for you today. We will start with a short introduction to the DISCA project and explain some of the core concepts that we're using. Creative economy, what is that? How do we define that, etc. Then we will have a panel discussion, bringing in perspectives both from research, practice, and EU policy. On behalf of all the researchers that are involved in these projects, I want to say that they are very keen to hear your perspective and to listen to your stories from across Europe. That is why we have 2 breakout sessions today. The first one is about the effects of the pandemic, and you will have the opportunity to meet some of your peers there, to share your views and listen to others. And then in the second part, we will look into the future and imagine what is possible. My name is Birgitta Persson, and I will be your moderator of this webinar. And I have with me my sidekick, Jonas Botani Werner, who will moderate the chat today.
Yeah, I'll keep a close eye on the chat and look out for enlightening comments, short and curious questions, and pass some of them on to Birgitta and the panel. So welcome.
Great, you can already now, if you have questions, start to post them, and we will monitor that, of course. I want to welcome you to the beautiful town of Ebeltoft in Denmark and to the amazing culture center Maltfabriken. Maltfabriken is the host of the Transeuropal and ENCC's conference Cultural Impact Now, and this event is the sort of starting point for that conference. Many years ago, one man and his friends had a dream of turning an old malt factory into a cultural hotspot, and to bring passion and fællesskab, which is Danish for togetherness, back to the city and the region. And here he is today in charge of Maltfabriken, which is one of the most important cultural transformations in Denmark this decade. Maltfabriken's director, Christian Krogh. And here he comes. Give the stage to Christian.
Thank you, Birgitta. And hi, everyone out there. What an honor to open this on a beautiful sunny day, and then a day on the Creative Economies in review. This is important for us. I was asked to tell a little story because 10, 20 years ago, we faced like an identity crisis in the town where we are. We had been a big tourist destination for decades, but suddenly the jobs started to disappear. The ferry stopped sailing. We were kind of a destination for infrastructure, and people just got older and older in this town, so we needed to change something. And one of the things that we got together as a starting point was this transformation of the malt factory into a new community center. Gathering lots of people, lots of energy into this community building and shared vision and dream for a new future. So here we are at Maltfabriken, being together and for the first time inviting Europe to participate. And yes, we work with culture and arts, but we also work with business, and we think this overlap is interesting. So in some of the buildings you can meet artists who are residents in Maltfabriken creating beautiful works and also going into journeys of exploring their next dream and realize some of the potential they have. But just besides them, you can find businesses working in different creative fields. We have filmmakers, we have programmers, we have designers, some does skate parks. You can meet all kinds of interesting and very creative people and businesses here in Maltfabriken. So it's kind of merging the art, the being together, which we call fællesskab, as Birgitta mentioned, but also a lot of jobs, a lot of attractiveness for having new people moving here and maybe making this a place where you want to live. And can we see the effect of this, the impact, as the headline of the conference is? Can we actually see this already? Yeah, we don't know. But what we can see is the mailbox of our place here at Malfabrikken. Every week, a new family writes us that now they are, as we say in Danish, pulling up the tent. They are moving to the countryside here in Denmark, and they want to set up a new life, centered in the nature, in this national park and in the beautiful surrounding, but also connecting to Malfabrikken. And the things this energy does to society is hard to describe. It's a whole new positive vibe. I guess you can imagine it like an energy boost of optimism, of the desire of being together, creating all kinds of stuff for families and children and art and events, food collaborations, circus. Every day there's a new fairy tale, and it's because of the passion of wanting to change. So please, I hope you will enjoy this next hours, and I hope you will follow the conference Cultural Impact Now. Already yesterday, lots of people started arriving, and at the moment in the brewery down in Malfabrikken, people are sitting watching this right now. So cheers to you all. I will look forward to following this session.
All right. Thank you so much, Christian. And I think there's many people who are dying to visit Malfabrikken once the restrictions are lifted. We're moving on. Jarna and Jonathan, now it's your turn, because we're going to hear about the DISCE research project and also some of the core concepts. So I want to introduce to the principal investigator of the DISCE research project, Professor Jarna Heinonen from Turku University, and her research colleague, Jonathan Cross from King's College in London, UK. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Birgitta. And hang on, I just tried to share my slides. I wonder if you can already see.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So and thank you, Christian Group, for your very insightful welcome. I'm really pleased that we are allowed to get in and hear about Malfabrikken and your creative activities over there. As Birgitta said, my name is Jarna Heinonen, and I work as a professor of entrepreneurship in the University of Turku School of Economics, and I'm currently leading this DISCE research consortium. DISCE indeed is a research project, and DISCE stands for Developing Inclusive and Sustainable Creative Economies. DISCE raises up a question: what are inclusive and sustainable creative economies, and more importantly, how can they be developed? These questions link very nicely to our topic of today, namely value, care, and capabilities for a sustainable and inclusive future. In order to tackle the questions, we have joined our forces. DISCE is a partnership of 4 European research institutes. In addition to University of Turku, Finland, we have researchers from the Gran Sasso Science Institute from Italy, from King's College London from the UK, and Stockholm School of Economics, Riga from Latvia. DISCE has also 2 experienced stakeholder partners, namely Comedia from Brussels and the European Network Trans-Europe House from Lund. We are most grateful for Trans-Europe House for organizing the Day of Creative Economies in the EU today, which actually demonstrates very much our DISCE approach. To find out what are inclusive and sustainable economies, we actively co-create and interact with the stakeholders to validate the relevance of our findings. This webinar today is one way to communicate with our stakeholders, and in the next 12 months there will be more and different types of events for us to continue the two-way conversations with you and other stakeholders in the field in order to share our findings and develop implications for policy and practice. We want you to be involved and are really pleased to have the chance to connect with you today. This approach is not only about co-creation, but it's also about conducting research with multiple methods. Through robust statistical analysis, we create new and more sensitive indicators to portray creative economies in Europe. We also develop rich understanding of the creative economies through regional case studies, which focus on different types of creative ecologies found around the 5 European regions in 10 middle-sized European towns. We are currently finalizing our empirical work in the 10 case study regions across Europe. The specific locations from Northern Europe are Pori in Finland and Lund in Sweden. From Central Europe, Enschede in the Netherlands and Leuven in Belgium. From Eastern Europe, Liepaja in Latvia and Pécs in Hungary. From Southern Europe, L'Aquila and Treviso from Italy. And from the British Islands, UK, Dundee and Chatham. DISC approaches the inclusive and sustainable creative economies from different angles. According to our theme of today, we first study value and value creation for a sustainable and inclusive future by investigating new forms of activity and related value creation models, be it in work, unpaid work, self-employment, or in companies. We also address the topic of care for a sustainable and inclusive future as we rethink growth by considering growth not only as GDP, but also as cultural development. We also study needed capabilities for a sustainable and inclusive future of creative economies as we explore creative and cultural workforce, skills development, and the creative higher education provision across Europe. Finally, through improved indicators and characterizations at national and the EU level, we will develop a comprehensive understanding of creative economies and its performance in Europe. My colleague Jonathan Cross from King's College London will now say a bit more about what makes DISC approach so distinctive. So please, Jonathan, I leave the floor for you.
Thanks very much, Jana. So I'm Jonathan Gross from King's College London. I'm part of the DISC team, and I'm just going to speak very briefly about some of our key terms to indicate what makes the DISC approach to studying and understanding the creative economy distinctive. Firstly, what do we mean by creative economy? So as you all know, the creative industries were defined in the late 1990s with a very strong emphasis on intellectual property and those creative parts of the economy that make money from intellectual property. And this was expanded in more recent times to think about the creative economy as not only the creative industries, but all of those ways in which creativity contributes to economic growth and jobs. And in DISC, we're expanding the notion of the creative economy further still by thinking about forms of creative activity, creative paths through life that are outside of paid employment, as well as those that are part of paid employment. So we call this an ecological approach or an ecosystems approach, thinking about the connections between the creative industries, the wider creative economy, the publicly funded arts, and everyday creativity. And this is where some of these other concepts come in, like capabilities. So we take this idea of capabilities from Amartya Sen's approach to economics, which really says GDP and jobs are not enough to know whether the economy is doing well. We need to know what kinds of lives people can live, what kinds of freedoms, what kinds of opportunities do people have to live the lives that they choose for themselves. So we apply that to the creative economy to think about what cultural and creative capabilities do people have? And when the creative economy is doing well, what kinds of capabilities does that make possible for a broad population? So we're using capabilities in that sense and thinking about the capabilities that people have in these 10 cities. And this also then relates to the question of value. When we're thinking about the value that the creative economy generates, it needs to be beyond GDP and jobs, although those are both very, very important. What are the range of things that make the creative economy valuable? We're paying attention to that diversity of values. And this in turn relates to the notion of care. So in the context of COVID-19, the idea of care has been discussed much more than it has been in the past, thinking about the value of doctors and nurses, thinking about the value of teachers, thinking about the ways in which all of these types of workers are doing the care work that sustains us all through crisis, but also the kinds of care work that go on in ordinary care that takes place in families, in communities, across a city. And we're very much thinking about how does care underpin all of the creative activity that takes place within the creative economy? And how can we think about creative economy workers as care workers? So that's part of the D-Share approach as well. And then this takes me on to the idea of inclusivity. We're using the idea of inclusivity in a broad sense in terms of capabilities. So not only inclusivity in a theatre or in a museum, but how can we think about inclusivity at the scale of the creative economy as a whole? Who has capability to develop a creative career? Who has capability to make decisions about the creative economy within a city? So we're thinking about inclusion in lots of domains within the creative economy. And this in turn relates to sustainability as well. What are we looking to sustain? We're looking to sustain arts and cultural organizations, yes, but we're also looking to sustain networks and systems and all of those support structures that constitute the creative economy, as well as sustaining the individual capabilities that people have. So we're thinking about sustainability across these different scales and the sustainability of systems as well as single organizations. And finally, as Birgitte indicated a few minutes ago, this isn't only a project which is interested in understanding the present of the creative economy. We're very much looking to the future and building on our research to create a space in which new futures for creative economies can be imagined. So we're really delighted that we have your participation later today in the workshop to begin to imagine the future of creative economies in Europe. And I'll say a bit more about that later on before we move into that futuring exercise. So that's all for me for now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Jarna and Jonathan. This gives us a great starting point for understanding how can we develop cultural policy and rethink how we can do in the future. Now we're going to start with a panel discussion, and I'm very happy to have some prominent guests to help us sort of paint the situation as it is now. And let me introduce to you, and I hope we have all of you with us. Start with Catherine Magnon, Head of Policy at the European Commission's Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. Can you hear me, Catherine?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Thank you and welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And then I move on to Elena Politseva, Head of Policy and Research at ITM, the International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts. Can you hear me?
Very well. Hello.
Welcome, Elena. And I want to introduce Gabriele Rosana, Policy Director at Culture Action Europe, a network that brings together cultural actors and networks across Europe, and is a great advocate for our sector. Gabriele, can you hear us?
Yes, very well. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Fantastic. And we're also delighted to have Annick Schram, Professor and Academic Director of the Cultural Management Master at Antwerp University. And can you hear us? Are you with us?
Good morning, everybody. Happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, great. And then finally, Jarna Heinonen, Principal Investigator of the DISC project. Are you with us?
I am.
You were before, so that's great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Well, it's hard to have a discussion about culture and not mention the pandemic. So I thought that let's start with the situation of the pandemic. And that's why I want to ask the first question to you, Elena. Could you please describe to us what is the situation now for the performing arts sector? Probably the hardest hit sector in Europe. And what do you think are the biggest lessons to be learned? Is there something that needs to be done on policy level?
Hello again, can you hear me?
Yes.
And thanks again for having me as part of this panel, and I will go straight to answering your question. The situation in the live performing arts sector is, of course, very worrying. The pandemic has devastated the performing arts, as the report by Ernst & Young, published in the beginning of this year, revealed. The losses of revenues are 37 billion in the performing arts in the European Union countries, which is 90% compared to the revenues of the previous year. This is the biggest loss among all cultural and creative sectors. Performing arts employs the biggest number of people among, again, all the cultural and creative sectors. It's around 1.2 million people before the pandemic. But many of these people work in a freelance, self-employed positions or hybrid type of work. Many of them have been put on redundant and lost their jobs. And many people, those who didn't lose their jobs, were considering to leave the sector. The figures in this regard have not been yet collected, and I think we will still see more clear trends in this regard, but some of the international levels, the figures are estimated between 40 to 60% of people were thinking about looking for jobs elsewhere, which means, of course, a devastating loss of talent in the performing arts. So that's about the jobs and the finances. However, we all agree that the live performing arts sector have been in a very difficult situation, but this means for different groups of professionals, for different organizations, part of the value chain, and for different countries, a very different thing. So there have been already huge gaps between countries in regard to support to the performing arts and cultural creative sectors in general. In the European Union before the pandemic, there have been already huge gaps between institutional part of the sector and independent sector. And there have been, of course, big gaps between different groups of professionals. And what I mean is those professionals which represent minority groups and those who come from more privileged backgrounds. And of course, we can already predict that these gaps have been widened greatly. According to the same study I was citing in the beginning, the most devastating effects for the creative and cultural sectors can be tracked in Central and Eastern Europe. We can also say that, obviously, this has been also discussed a lot, that the most fragile players of the sector have got the biggest pressure on their shoulders. Here we're talking about artists and the beginning of the value chain, the producers, especially micro-organizations and especially those those professionals which worked on a freelance basis. And then, of course, people who couldn't afford already before the artistic career because of the risks it entails, financial risks, socioeconomic risks. Those people, I mean those people from fragile socioeconomic backgrounds, got again very clear sign that you better stay away from these type of jobs because this will not bring you stability that one may wish for. So this is on the sad side. Lessons learned, there have been a lot of innovation going on the bright side in the sector. The sector learned about its own fragility. The sector learned about fragility of its partners, presenters such as venues and festivals, learned yet again how artists are fragile, but artists also learned about more institutional structures, what challenges they meet. So this was great, and there have been a lot of solidarity going on, a lot of fair practices which started and which will continue according to our members in the sector. There have been huge artistic experimentation going on. A lot of artistic ideas turned into socially relevant practices, socially engaged projects. Such as presenting and performing in elderly houses, in hospitals for young children and so on. Of course, we all talk about digital technology that have been used in our sector. I wouldn't be maybe overly positive about it because according to the recent statistics, it's less than half of the performing arts professionals organizations were able to use digital technology due to lack of skills and due to lack of finances. But nevertheless, this has been also a very interesting trend. There have also been a lot of interesting formats developed, new audiences reached, and many other things. And what is also interesting, that mobility has been rethought a lot. So these are the interesting and lessons learned. And I think maybe to finish all that, all this innovation has a great potential for the sector to actually recover, let's say not in a better shape, but in a more sustainable way. And I think all this needs support. And just to maybe second what we heard about the DISCA project, more money is no longer enough. There needs to be a different type of approach, but more money are also always welcome. So that's for my part.
Thank you, Elena. I was thinking you're bringing up one really important issue there, and that's the precariousness of creative work that came to the fore during the pandemic. And I mean, it was clear that artists and creative workers couldn't really be helped by the existing system. And we cannot solve this solely by cultural policies. This is connected to the wider social support systems in the member states, unemployment benefits systems, etc., etc. So how can this be best taken forward on EU level? And I wanted to pose this question to Gabriele from Culture Action Europe and Catherine Magnan. I wonder, Gabriele, could you maybe start?
Thank you, Birgitta. Thank you. And also for having this very, very important panel, for bringing together so different angles, perspectives, and actors to debate in this very timely moment. I will follow up on something that Elena was just concluding with. I mean, she was saying, can you hear me well? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. She was saying, indeed, more money is not enough anymore. We need to shift a paradigm. We need also to trigger a regulatory approach, to trigger a more mature political discussion there. And when you were posing the question, indeed, you were speaking of bridging between cultural policies and other policies. Well, when we speak of the working conditions in the cultural and creative sectors, we are speaking of social security profiles in a specific sector, that of the creative, cultural and creative economies. And we are speaking, as the DISCA project sheds light on, about one of the most precarious sectors of our economies, and full of freelancers, non-standard types of work, intermittence, and so on and so forth. Politically speaking, already having a proposal regulating, proposing some rules for the culture and creative sector can also act as an initiator for the same sort of thinking in other sectors of our economies that are characterized by precarious conditions and situations. So indeed, we are speaking of not just the cultural policy that we are used to here. That's the fact. That's what is enshrined in the treaties. Is not a primary competence at all of the European Union, but we are speaking also of a specific policy field, that's a social policy, where the Union has proven, right, that it is acting and it is front-loading actions. And that has been already before the pandemic, as we know, with the social pillar, with the Gothenburg Declaration in 2017. It has been sort of, if we can say, updated less than 1 month ago in the social summit in Porto. So the European Union wants to be a social actor and wants to, in order to really do that in a meaningful way, we do suggest the culture and creative sector, especially in light of the impact of the pandemic, is the second most impact sector, as the study from Ernst & Young that was quoted before says, right after, but it's like 1-2% difference, the aviation sector. So it already offers an opportunity. It offers an opportunity, and I must say this is a call that comes from also the European institutions, the European Parliament hearing the calls from the culture and creative sectors as proposed in September last year, is now working on an own initiative report on the situation of artists post-COVID-19, artists and cultural workers. And the proposal there, the initial proposal, let's say the working title of this proposal, is a framework for the working conditions in the cultural creative sectors and industries, which, as a matter of fact, as a methodology, as we see it, should upward convergence among member states and setting minimum standards for artists and cultural workers in the member states across Europe. There was another point from Ellen I would like to take up when she was mentioning the huge gaps that we see across Europe, which at the end of the day threatens also the very cultural diversity of Europe. If there are also post-pandemic, if that is exacerbated as a characteristic post-pandemic, where you have maybe member states who are more sensitive to the matter, that upfront, they do front load support for their cultural and creative economies, and others that do leave them behind. So on the one hand, this would help the convergence and also tackle the very nature of the cross-border mobility that we know in the cultural and creative sector. On the other hand, just to conclude with something I was saying at the beginning and then leave it to Catherine to also answer, the money is not enough, but it's a good way to start. And I'm happy that also the pandemic offered the cultural and creative sectors the chance to team up, to think about strategies to get out together from this. And that's very much represented also by the call of the 2%, which we all acknowledge is a small figure, but it's a politically important one. 2% of the national recovery and resilience plans dedicated across Europe to culture, so to the recovery of culture. That is a call coming from the sector, backed by the European Parliament. It also received the support of the Commissioner Gabriel, and now we are in a phase where the Commission has received most of the recovery plans. So we are waiting to indeed learn more if this target has been non-binding target at all. Let me say that just to clarify, if it has been met or not, and what is in there for culture in the national recovery plans. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gabriela. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Catherine.
Yes, thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me well. My connection is not excellent this morning, so please wave or do something if you don't hear me well.
Very well.
Yes,
it's all fine.
Okay, super. Okay. Look, so many points to address. The Recovery and Resilience Fund, indeed. We have seen some plans, but the final adoption is not done yet, and it is still confidential, so I cannot fully share yet what's in there. But how should I put it? In a way, there will be money for culture taken as a whole. You know, there is a new RRF, it's a new tool entirely. With the crisis, a lot of money additional has been made available in general, but also for the cultural and creative sectors. For Creative Europe, we're going to front load the money. And you know, there has been a big increase, 60% increase in the budget, which is unprecedented for Creative Europe for the next 7 years. So we're going to front load this money this year and next year to make sure that the sector gets it when it needs it most, which is now or as soon as possible. Then there is a new cluster entirely dedicated to culture and Creative Europe in Horizon Europe. Then there are many other EU funding programs that have possibilities to fund culture in different ways. And we are now putting together an online tool, an easy, you know, find your way through EU funding programs tool, so that the sector can really use every opportunity that there is. It will never be enough. We fully agree. It will never be enough. And European funding is is not as important as funding at the national and regional level for culture because of the competences, but still it is more than it was in the previous 7 years. Even though I agree with you, we would wish to see even more, but let's not forget that. Second point, working conditions of artists. Is very sad that because we needed this crisis to set in motion more, more work on the working conditions of artists, which to the people who follow, of course, the sector and who are specialists is well known for being super precarious and coming with many, difficulties linked to social security, taxes, especially when you speak of mobility between EU countries, but not only. So all this is very well known. Let's take the crisis as an opportunity to go further. And Gabriele told us what the Parliament is preparing. On the side of the Commission, we have three things on, three deliverables when it comes to the working conditions of artists. You will laugh because I'm going to say first a study. You will think, oh, those bureaucrats, all they can come up with are studies. But still, it's the first time we have a panorama, an exhaustive, complete picture of what happens, the situation in member states with regard to artists, their social security, taxes, etc. Making an inventory of the situation and a real state of art picture plus proposals for the future. Why is that important? Because it's an area in which member states, the countries, are very quick to tell us, Commission or EU institutions, that they have the primary competences. And it is true, we cannot impose anything when it comes to social security. We cannot impose anything when it comes to status of artists, but we can learn from each other. And having this panorama, showing which countries have a precise status for artists, giving what conditions, etc., is a start to improve the overall dialogue and inspire good practices. So as of September, we will have a regular meeting with experts from ministries of culture from member states to discuss those good practices, exchange, and hopefully see them being implemented in other countries. So that's the second thing that we have going on when it comes to the working conditions of artists, actual work with ministries of culture as of September. And then we also have a dialogue with civil society, because we must absolutely keep our fingers on the pulse and have civil society's opinion, feedback, and inspiration. So it's a story to be followed, I would say, on the working conditions of artists when it comes to the push that can be exerted at EU level. So I will be happy to report about progress at the end of the year or next year. But certainly we have more work and more initiatives on this topic than we ever had in the past. So at least one good thing.
Yes.
Thank you. Back to you,
Indeed
Nike.
so. Yeah, thank you. I just want to give the chance to Elena and Gabriele for a short comment, if you want, on this topic before we move on.
Yes, I would love to. I was first of all would like to comment on what Katrin said, a very subtle part of Katrin's speech, but about Creative Europe, that it's less important than national funding. Like our members who are practitioners in the performing arts, many of them see Creative Europe as like a hugely important tool, because it's the only tool that supports this cross-border pan-European collaboration, and hunger for that collaboration is enormous in the sector. It's not news, it has been like this already since ages and ages, but it's growing. And during the pandemic, many national member states, they have reduced budgets for international collaboration. International meaning with other countries, even neighboring countries within Europe as well. So the need for Creative Europe is even bigger now. That's one thing. And another thing very shortly about the framework for working conditions. We have been discussing it with Culture Action Europe, with other networks as well. This idea is floating there around already a lot. I think what maybe is interesting to highlight here, our idea about it is that we need to address all those issues. Address doesn't mean to solve, but to address them as a complex, recognize that these issues are interrelated, because there's a lot of silo discussions about copyrights, about gender equality, about diversity in the sector, funding programs, but maybe we just need a debate when we kind of try to put links together. And also what many in our sector say, other networks like ours, is that we also need to really look into the reasons why it's situation like that, and reasons like what do we mean by atypical work and why that like this. Of course, it's not just all depends on funders or policymakers, it's our whole system, but it's good to map these reasons, education system as well. It influences a lot how professional dynamics go. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriele, very short, is there anything from your side? Yeah.
Very little, if not, I mean, indeed, the last time that a structured conversation on this topic happened, on this topic was 2007, and so much has changed in the meantime. And we see from the Commission side, I quoted other institutions before, indeed, a commitment in addressing it, already starting with a study that can map. I mean, a study was already published last year at the end of 2020. I see Barbara also linked here in the chat, and a new study or the work with the governments that Catherine was mentioning before. So the real hope for a multimodular discussion, for our overarching discussion that can address not just the silos indeed, but the working conditions per se, is very much there. And we are following the process of the Voices of Culture, and we do really hope that the Commission will help member states to throw the heart beyond the fence in that, and try to be braver, let's say.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Great. Now we're moving on to a related theme where we're talking about capabilities, skills, innovation. So the EU has pointed out that students at Europe's creative higher educations, arts and theatre, etc., they lack sufficient entrepreneurial and cross-cutting skills. They might be excellent in artistic skills. So I wonder, Annick Skram, you're a professor of cultural entrepreneurship. What's your take on this?
Yes, it's a complex issue, but there's indeed a problem, and it is reinforced by the crisis, I think. So I think creatives has to be in the future even more resilient and so entrepreneurial. But indeed, if you look at the higher education field, then we see that the art schools are still mainly based on a profession, a skill, a profession, and a craft. I think that's still important. We can't lose that, because everything starts from creativity, and you want to give the opportunity to develop the real talents, to become really, to develop their talent. So that's one thing. So the question is, do we have to make them all also entrepreneurial? And that's a difficult question, because your time is limited, and you can do it in different ways. The question is, how do you do it? And when do you do it in their career? Is it already at school, when they are art students and develop their creative talents? A lot of the students in practice are at that time not really worried about their future. Maybe that's also part of the problem, of course. But also when we look at the schools, these are quite young people who are still looking after their own identity, their own talent. And during this education program, they find out if it's really their mission to become an artist. And some of them discover that during this education program that maybe it's not really their talent. And I think during this education that they need to have already the opportunity to develop other talents, because you have in the creative economy a lot of different roles. It's not only the creative, and they have a love for the creative sectors, but maybe in another role. And I think the education system must be that flexible that you give already the opportunity during their career to say, yeah, maybe your talent is different and it's in another role, still in the creative economy, but in another role. So, and then you can do that, you can offer that as an art school, or you can collaborate with existing, other existing programs, how to make this connection. In Flanders, so I'm also responsible for a master in cultural management and entrepreneurship, and we work more with the students when they graduated. So we have a conversation with the art schools, and then we see those who want to start an own company, or so it's more in postgraduate. But as I said, it's a personal development and a personal growth, and each student has to find their own way. And at the other hand, on an institutional level, we have to give the opportunities to the students to find their own path and to see what are the possibilities. And yeah, I'm actually also involved in an Erasmus Plus program, and it's about mentorship in the CCI, so in the cultural and creative industries. And it's really interesting. They have also this week panel discussion, and it's from universities, for universities. So students who are following a program, a master program in cultural management, how mentorship can be included, and also for the professional field. And I think there is still a lot of potential also to develop that role more of mentoring and capacity building. And you have different models in different countries. For example, in Serbia, there is a real institute only on creative mentorship. But it's amazing how bottom-up they work, and they connect mentors with mentees. And it is indeed about personal growth and working on skills, weaknesses. And it's also from a perspective of lifelong learning. And I think that can really interesting to develop that more from this bottom-up perspective, and to make also the artist more resilient. So I can tell you more about that if there are any questions about that, but it's also a European program, and it is yeah, I think there is still a lot of opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annika. I want to give Jarna the opportunity to comment, to see what do you see from your perspective as professor of entrepreneurship?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. I must say that I suppose the challenge Annik just raised or talked about is very much in all fields. I mean, or in higher education sector. So is there any room for entrepreneurship studies in the curricula, and if there is some, how to tackle it? So even business school, I know, have traditionally prepared their students for entrepreneurship quite poorly. This is in change in all sectors, but it is taking time, and but I can see that the climate and the attitudes are gradually changing. So in general, I would say that self-employment and entrepreneurship are not presented nor considered as viable career options for the students. And now I even say in the case of the business school, not to talk about the other institutes, I dare to wonder whether such an option is presented to students after all. And I would assume that creative higher education sector is no exception in that respect. This is a little bit provocatively put, but I think that I'm not lying too much, but still there is room for maneuvers in this respect, I would say.
Yes. And Jarna, while I have you here, I wonder if you can comment a bit on this topic from the DISCE research perspective. We also heard from Jonathan here to explain that you have an ecological take on creative economies. Would you like to go a bit further on that topic in the light of this discussion?
Yes, I'm happy to. As to innovations, it implies actually that innovation takes place in many locations by different actors, involving many kinds of novelty and value. And new innovations can take place within business modeling, new ways of working with customers and participants, in new processes of value creation, thanks to technological advancements, for example, or even profound systemic and cultural changes in understanding what is being offered, how it is being offered, and at what prices to customers. So such systemic changes may imply changes in customer behavior too, in getting rid of widespread assumption of free cultural offerings, for example, which actually, in a way, is one root cause or root reason for precariousness of the field. In DISCE, actually, we acknowledge this variety. On one hand, we study and acknowledge the opportunities and potential competitiveness of the creative economies. But on the other hand, we study and acknowledge the precariousness and challenges of the creative economy and the needs to promote change in a variety of fields to gain sustainability and inclusivity. So in this sense, in DISCE, we are studying the both sides of the coin. This, I hope, highlights also the need to have an ecological approach to innovation policy. It is not only, as it was already referred earlier, it's about bridging different policies. So it's not only a matter of cultural policy, it's also a matter of technology and innovation policy, local development and business policy, regional policy, entrepreneurship policy, social policy, if not even health policy at some point. So it is really a joint policy endeavor to reach the grassroots level actors in the field with an aim to unleash the potential of creative sectors and to create a more inclusive and sustainable European creative economy. I hope this somehow sort of enlightens the way we understand ecological approach to innovation and innovation policy and creative economies.
Thank you, Jarna. And I just want to give the opportunity to Catherine. If would you like to comment on this from your point of view? And it's fine if it's not. If not.
I was muted. No, of course, absolutely. It's a matter of students, but also of professionals, you know, skilling and upskilling, reskilling. So that's why, you know, 3 commissioners in the commission recently had a pact for skill meetings where we invited all key stakeholders in the field of culture and the cultural and creative sectors to discuss exactly that, you know, the skills for the sector, the talent, how to develop talent in Europe and keep it in Europe. Some of the stakeholders told us there is a war for talents, and we should keep our, you know, foster, grow talents, but also keep them, make sure that they stay in Europe. And that came across from the audiovisual sector and other sectors as well. So as Commission, we're really supporting also the skilling, you know, the retraining of the sector of adults, in addition to what Annick said with regard to students. And the final thing I wanted to say is that we've got 2 very interesting projects on the skills of cultural heritage professionals that are going on. So a very important issue indeed. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. I have a final question for all of you in the panel, and then we will take up if there are any questions from the audience, you in the panel. And that is that many cultural practitioners who are here today come from cities and regions in Europe where there might not even be a cultural policy in place. Or if it does, it can be quite marginal or hollow or instrumentally linked to city branding or tourism. So I wonder, for you in the panel, what would be your advice for them who are out there struggling? Are there any argumentation or tactics that you would suggest for them? I know every local situation is specific, but there might be something. I wonder, Elena, would you have something? What would you suggest if you want to start?
Yes, I would start with saying this is a very challenging situation those practitioners are, and unfortunately, those situations are very multiple and numerous in the European countries. We have been in touch with our members closely in the last many months of this pandemic. And what we have learned from all of them is that since there was a limited potential for production, rehearsals, doing anything that they used to do, there were a lot of discussions, a lot of reflection, a lot of kind of trying to go forward, which was very important to many of them. But what they all noticed, and the very frustrated factor for them, was that these discussions were very scattered on a national, I'm talking about within one country. There could be presenters teaming up and talking about their challenges. There could be people from classical music talking about their challenges, and so on and so forth. So what was kind of the conclusion? I interviewed many of our members on that topic last autumn, and each of them, like a psychotherapeutical journey, concluded in the end that we need to find a good format to organize ourselves. This is the first step, and good format to hear everyone and to come up with a clear vision. What do we want ourselves as such a cultural policy? Of course, this will not solve the whole problem, but I think the first step is to find such a format. So it's really about the format. How do you talk to each other, and how do you shape your demands, recommendations, and vision? That's, of course, there could be many more suggestions what to do, but that would be the starting point.
Thank you, Elena. Annick, would you have any advice?
Yes, advice. I have also some reflections or comments on that. I recognize the fact indeed that some cities or local governments still need to recognize the value of culture. I think for me it starts there, to have a kind of definition and recognition of the value of culture in its different dimensions, economically, socially, artistically, and it starts from there. And then, because I did international comparative research also a few years ago on cultural governance, and there also in some countries they even don't know what is the definition of culture, and then they are still in the beginning to develop cultural policy. And also in Europe, cultural policy is not that old as an autonomous domain. It's only in the 50s that it started with André Malraux in France, and later in other European countries that there was a minister of culture. So it is a quite young policy domain. So for me, and we are in different stages, and in some locations, they still have to recognize that as an autonomous cultural policy domain. And then I think, this ecological or ecosystem approach is still, it would be good to have that from the beginning also, from this holistic approach, to look at different departments, how you can approach the cultural sector and what is in your city and what is available in your city, starting from the DNA, and not to see it just as tourism, but as also a leverage for social issues and economical one, and so to value really culture in a holistic approach.
Yes, thank you very much. Now it's time to see if we have any questions from the audience. Over to you, Jonas.
Hi. Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat, which is beautiful to see. But there's a lot of inspiration being shared. So people sharing, Barbara Stasher's posted a link to a study about artist conditions. Martin asked the question about the release of the new Creative Europe. That was answered directly by Gabriella and Elena. So there's stuff going on there, which is really great. And we also had a comment on Annick's talk about the opportunity for cultural management students and others, which was directed inside the chat. But we have a couple of questions. Paula Sajina is writing a question about bureaucracy. And she says, the issue of bureaucracy, which weighs down the work of cultural organizations, but not only. In some countries, especially Italy, this greatly limits the possibility of cultural and economic growth. And she asks, is there any suggestions on how to deal with rough bureaucracy that is very prevalent in some countries?
Yes. Thank you for that question. I think we are many who can relate to this. And I wonder who in the panel would like to start to answer Paula's question. You can just unmute yourself.
If I may, just shortly. It's not a very direct answer, because how to deal with bureaucracy, reduce the bureaucracy, but if that would be in our hands, you know. But I would like to maybe refer to the European programs, which are being seen by many as very complicated and let's say bureaucratic. That's what we hear a lot from smaller practitioners. But I would like to say that there have been quite a change, at least what we can read already in the new guidelines, new regulation on the Creative Europe 21-27, in which there are actually quite a lot of focus done on micro-organizations and also individual professionals, which comes with some attempts, and I think these attempts will be effective, attempts to simplify the procedures. There will be some lump sums, there will be small, like micro, small and medium, small, medium and large projects, and many other of these kind of measures for which we have been advocating since 2018 when we saw the first regulation draft. We are very happy with that. There is also this program iPortunus, which is a great example of how actually bureaucracy can be reduced even at such a massive level at the European Union. This is a beautiful example, and I think maybe for many national cultural ministries, it's a good practice to look at. Everyone is applauding iPortunus exactly for that this is a very simple program to apply. I think we often hear that bureaucracy is also kind of a mechanism to stop the frustration, so that not too many people apply and the success rate is not 0.1%. So to avoid that, that's kind of many people see it like this. But again, we could see with some of the simplified programs at the EU level that this is not necessarily a strong argument for that. So that would be my 50 cents.
Thank you. So actually, simplifications on EU level could be a role model for other countries to see, and also for us to sort of point out that it is possible. Jonas, any other questions for the panel?
Yes, I do have some questions. There is one question from Camille, which is about entrepreneurial skills and cultural workers. So she writes, are there any specific policy directions that could be adopted at the national level to address the lack of entrepreneurial skills when it comes to cultural workers? Are there any systematic studies or databases on the success stories of this topic?
Are there any studies on this matter? I wonder, Gabriele, would you know any of this? Or do you want Jonas to repeat the question?
Yeah,
could you do that, please?
Repeat it.
Yeah.
So Camille writes, are there any specific policy directions that could be adopted at the national level to address the lack of entrepreneurial skills when it comes to cultural workers? Are there any systematic studies or databases on the success stories of regarding this topic? So you can read it also in the chat if you want to have it in writing.
Yes, and maybe this could also be Annick or Jarna who would know about studies on this. Maybe Gabriele, you want to start?
Yeah, I want to just maybe, yes, I leave it to Annick and Jarna to complement on the studies, on the research, just to add indeed that it was mentioned at some point also before the full integration also in the discussion that we are having on the working conditions of artists, that it has to uphold, it has to to take into account the key dimension of a lifelong education perspective and of training, but also mentoring programs that can be integrated also in the EU's main programs that can accompany then also the development of skills. I mean, not just entrepreneurial skills, but all the skills we need for the green digital transition, as we usually say in according to the main priorities of today's Europe. So accompany citizenship skills, if I also may say so. Annick was mentioning the many values of culture. Let's introduce there also the democracy among those. There has been a very interesting work I'm seeing and following on the Porto Santo Charter, which indeed speaks of cultural democracy and put all of this in perspective of strengthening the democratic bone of our societies. So, but I would probably go back to mentoring, as I was hinting at it before, together with other learning experiences, but also especially the peer-to-peer one.
Jana, would you like to shortly comment also on the question?
The question, the original question, yes, please. As to entrepreneurial skills, not so much that I know, but I would here like to, Annick perhaps might know, but I would here like to refer to our DISC reports, the 2 reports which can be found from our webpage. Namely, during our project, we've already published 2 reports. One in Creative Workforce in Europe Statistics Report, and the other one Creative Higher Education in Europe Statistics Report, which sort of vaguely touch upon the very topic that has been addressed in the chat. Thank you. Please have a look at.
We will have time for one last question shortly. Jonas.
It's going to be a hard choice here because there's a lot of questions popping in at the last minute. But I think there is one here. Jurga is writing, there's a lot of discussion about developing entrepreneurial skills in cultural workers, but I wonder whether there's any work being done on developing interest in working in cultural sector for students in entrepreneurship.
So if there's any work being done on engaging and sort of attracting students of other fields into cultural work, if I understand the question right. Annick, would you like to have a go on that one?
As I,
you know?
No, it's a very interesting question. It's indeed, cultural workers can learn from other sectors, but the other way around. So, but again, I think this mentorship, it depends how you develop it, but it gives the possibility to connect with people from other sectors, and it's not a hierarchical position between mentor and mentee, but it's a mutual, and there I think that could be at an institutional level. I don't see it yet, although of course you have and it started already 10 years ago or more even in the Alto Design Factory, where you are going to connect in a structural way, creatives with business students and engineers and technology students. I see good examples of that, but not that many do that in a structural way. That means on an institutional level. So, but as Jarna said already, we really move forward, but it goes a bit slowly, I think. I'm very curious to see what will happen with the KICS, the knowledge, the
innovation community.
Yes,
innovation community.
I don't know what it means. The KICS, so because that's the first time, I think, and it's another way of giving support and stimulating the sector to work together, because we are used to yeah, you apply for a subsidy and then you do a research, but this is really another approach, and I'm curious. I'm looking forward to that. It's more about investment than about receiving money to do a research. So that's not totally different, and the collaboration with industry and with policy institutions also. So yeah, very excited about that. They could
and
be
universities.
Yeah, and universities, yeah, of course. Yeah, and so yeah.
All right, so thank you so much on that. I want to say that all these questions you have in the chat, we will of course save this and find a way to communicate answer to this or thoughts on that. But we also have 2 interactive sessions where it's possible for all of you to start to have conversations about these topics coming up very soon. Thank you so much to Jarna, Gabriele, Katrin, Elena, and Nick. As Katrin said, there's a lot of work ahead of us, but it sounds very exciting that there are a lot of new ways of working together that hasn't been really open before. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Good
now,
luck for the rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the next section. And I want to invite Stephanie Thomas from Comediae and Sandy Fitzgerald from Olive Articultural Agency. And both of you have been engaged in doing interviews with stakeholders and cultural practitioners around Europe as part of the DISCA research. And we will hear from you, what are the results, what have you heard? And I believe, Stephanie, you will start. And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Birgitta. Excellent panel. Hello to fellow collaborators and participants. I am Stephanie Thomas, Coordinator of Projects at Comediae ASBL, one of the partners of the DISCA project. And today I will very quickly highlight a few takeaways that our team has extracted from the results of the recent DISCA Stakeholders Consultative Survey. This survey, designed within DISCA by Comediae and Trans-Europals, was developed not for scientific research purposes, but to stimulate stakeholder engagement and discussions, especially from a policy engagement. In a preliminary estimate, the replies of the 52 respondents included organizations that represent a total amount of over 1,450 member organizations, and as a cascade represent tens of thousands of individuals working in cultural and creative economies. Based on this membership analysis, as well as on the other indicators, we consider this a significant response and hope that it will provide key points of reflection for today's activities. We also use the consultative survey for a more targeted audience, that of the DISCA peer-to-peer recovery program, for which we recorded 14 responses for 12 organizations. And you will hear more on this program from Sandy, who will present just after. For today's brief presentation, I highlight 3 questions and their responses. And you will see the answers to the main survey as a larger pie chart and the focus group as a smaller pie chart. The first question asks about the importance of reflecting human rights and democratic practices and values into definitions of the cultural and creative economies. And you see here that the majority of respondents say it's very important and they should condition the legitimacy and respect of practices in the cultural and creative economies. And for the following right after that, if they didn't think it was critical, they thought it should be an important part of any analysis. The second question I highlight today considered the role of new forms of cultural expression and cultural dissemination, thinking about digital technology to the survival of the creative economies. And here we see, okay, I have an issue with my thing. So I'll just tell you what we have seen. The majority of respondents rejected strongly a future that did not give equal weight to traditional cultural expression going forward. The third and final question highlighted today asks whether there is an overdependence of the sector on public funding and whether there should be greater self-reliance. The answers we had showed ambivalence under which it is also partially assumed that cultural and creative economies should do a bit more to support themselves and reduce their dependence on public funding. I will stop sharing and speak with you now. So as a quick summary of takeaways from the survey, we found that there is a clear conscience that culture and creativity cannot be completely isolated from their social and therefore political dimension in the large sense of the concept, that there is a clear conscience about the high contribution of the cultural and creative economies. There was great positivity relating to the expectation that we can be optimistic as we will not only see a return to normality post-COVID-19, but the surge of new opportunities and possibilities for the sector and its players. There was a clear signal that the current statistics on cultural and creative work in Europe only partially reflected gender diversity, even less so the value produced and created by key players, and even less so the ethnic diversity of the sector as a whole. And we will publish on DISCA's website in the upcoming days the full results of the CCS consultative survey, and we will ensure that you have the link in an upcoming communication. So we thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to hand over to Sandy.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And hello, everybody. It's really good to be here. I'm going to share my screen with a very short PowerPoint. Okay. Can people see that? I hope so. So, this is from the peer-to-peer recovery program that all of Arte are leading on for the DISCA project. And very quickly, because we don't have too much time to get into it. So who's involved in this program? It's a range of arts and cultural organizations from Spain, from Greece, from Italy, and from Cyprus. And they are theatre companies, cultural centres, community arts groups, and support organizations, some of whom you will meet representatives of as facilitators today. So what is this program? It's a facilitated peer-to-peer support, share, and capacity building program, and mainly between the groups. So it's all about collaboration and supporting each other. So at this point, there is more of the program, but at this point, we did an analysis of what we have so far, and we broke it down under 4 main headings, which are audience and community development, programming, fundraising and finance, and theory and practice. So let's have a look at what we've come up with very, very quickly. So audience and community development insights. So what was clear was a shift away in these pandemic times, a shift away from the concept of passive audiences and a desire for engagement with community. Number 2, networking and partnerships, moving away from competition to collective principles. And number 3, all organizations had to scale down drastically and cut their physical international programs and partnerships. On the plus side, this meant a concentration on local communities and a shift into digital meeting and working spaces, which obviously opened up a global situation. Key issues arising out of the audience and development area. How to communicate and involve audiences when the doors are closed. how to develop, manage and present digital work, how to develop and create educational tools and programs, building networks of similar realities in Europe for collaborations, exchange of ideas and experiences to learn and improve, new methods of audience development, particularly with a younger generation and younger generations who have gone through this pandemic crisis, and how to build a shared sense of belonging without a physical presence. The second heading, programming, some insights into this area. The process is as important as the product. This was one of the main messages coming through, that people discovered when there wasn't an emphasis on the product, maybe led by funding, etc., the quality processes lead to fundamental and long-term cultural development. Number two, restrictions on programming is a very real issue, and when programming does resume, what will change, because there will be changes. Number three, a lack of live programming is a big issue for artists and production staff, this was mentioned earlier, who usually survive on part-time work as freelancers, and this is a question for all of us, how can they be supported at this time? And number four, in some countries, restrictions have meant more repression on what are seen as radicals, so that the cultural sector in some countries is seen as a radical sector. The key issues arising: how to find partners for EU projects, explore possibilities to develop new international projects, create internal space within the organizations to assess the shock of COVID, how to set up artisan residency programs and get collaboration going again, how to support performing arts and theatre companies, which was already mentioned as the hardest hit sector, and learn about strategic planning. So one of the things coming out of all of this is there needs to be more strategic planning. Fundraising and finance insights. Interestingly, in our group anyway, very few organizations involved in the program are now in financial crisis, which was a bit of a surprise. But, however, this may be because 2020 and 2021 were already supported by grants and contracts agreed before COVID, and in some countries, government interventions during COVID. A lot of people feel the real problem, as these supports dry up, are going to be 21, 22 and going into the future. And number three, digital programming does not compensate for live programming. A, because the technology needed to do something well is both complicated and costly. And B, it is very difficult to monetize online contact. For this reason, some organizations choose not to go digital at all. And the key issues coming out of this: an urgent need to become more sustainable, and that's a big question. Old models need to be reviewed, everybody feels that. New fundraising ideas and know-how, new business ideas, new investors, and how to introduce new services to the market, how to communicate better with the corporate sector, and generating income online, which was already mentioned. Then there was the last sector, which was theory and practice. Now, there wasn't a lot of insights or key issues and needs. This is all in discussion, and it's a big area of debate. And that's why we chose these 7 questions arising from our research to go forward into our working groups. And the 7 questions are: what was the understanding of sustainability in the sector before COVID? Has it changed? What did we learn from the pandemic about sustainability? Number 2, how to create safety nets for the arts. It was obvious that the arts are very vulnerable, so when a crisis like this hits, which COVID has revealed the vulnerability of the arts sector, how can this situation be improved? How to increase art in the community and be of help to the wider community. One thing is clear from all the research, that arts and cultural sectors who are embedded and supported by their community are stronger in times of crisis than those who are marginalized or isolated? Number 4, how can we advocate for the value of arts to be recognized in the wider society on political domains? Number 5, how can art and culture contribute to rebuilding society post-COVID? Number 6, how can we build and share a sense of belonging without having a physical presence? Is it possible to engage and develop culturally online? And how will this look in the future? And number 7, how to address issues highlighted by COVID. And some people in our group particularly mentioned colonial history, inequality, and freedom of expression. And that's really our overview of where we are with the peer-to-peer program. And I'll hand you back now to Brigitte.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Stephanie, for this. And these questions coming out of the peer-to-peer program is actually bringing us straight into what we're going to do now, because this is the time for the breakout session where you will have the opportunity, you will be invited to join one room, and this will happen randomly. And we will have 7 rooms, 7 facilitators, and a question each. And you don't have to be an expert to start to answer these questions. Your thoughts, your views, your experience are very valuable. And I want to just say and introduce who will be the facilitators. So it will be Kate Armstrong from Fab Lab Barcelona, Paula Sarcina from Music Theatre International in Rome, Ed Cousins from Interacting Madrid/UK, Antonia Silvaggi from Melting Pro in Rome, Stephanie Thomas, that you've met before, from Comediae, and Ignacy Guardans, also from Comediae, and Sandy Fitzgerald, that you heard of. So now you will have an invitation to join a breakout session. It will last for 30 minutes, and then we meet back here. After that, we will have a break. Enjoy the conversations, and see you back in half an hour.